If you feel like you keep losing spiritual battles, I need you to hear this carefully. It may not be because the enemy is stronger. It may be because you're fighting the wrong way. When I was deep in the occult, we studied believers closely, not their theology, not their church attendance, their patterns, how they reacted under pressure, how they handled fear, how they responded when things didn't move quickly. And I noticed something disturbing. Most spiritual battles were never won or lost in dramatic moments. They were lost in small, repeated reactions. We didn't need someone to renounce their faith. We didn't need them to abandon prayer. We just needed them exhausted, reactive, and impatient. If pressure came and they panicked, momentum shifted. If delay came and they complained, momentum shifted. If offense came and they spoke impulsively, momentum shifted. Not because darkness became powerful, because they surrendered ground emotionally. That's the part most people never talk about. Spiritual warfare isn't usually loud. It's subtle. It's psychological. It's strategic. It happens in your thought life at 11:47 p.m. It happens in your tone during an argument. It happens in the decision you make while tired. And the enemy counts on one thing above all else: overreaction. I remember watching situations where someone was stable for weeks, disciplined, focused, prayerful, and then one moment of emotional reaction unraveled everything. Not permanently, but enough to create access. After I left that life, I realized something painful. Most believers don't lose because they lack authority. They lose because they lack restraint. They fight everything. They respond to everything. They try to fix everything immediately. And urgency is the trap. In this message, I'm going to show you what we feared most: not loud prayers, not dramatic rebukes, but a specific posture that shut down interference consistently. If you're tired of feeling like you're constantly battling, constantly defending, constantly reacting, stop losing spiritual battles. Do this instead. In the next chapter, I'm going to expose the real battlefield, and it's not where you think it is. When I was inside the occult, we didn't waste time attacking what was strong. We applied pressure where reactions were predictable. And the place where reactions were most predictable was not churches, not prayer meetings, not loud confrontations. It was the mind. That's the real battlefield. Not your house, not your finances, not even your relationships, your interpretation. If we could influence how someone interpreted a situation, we didn't have to control the situation itself. Let me explain. Two people can experience the same delay. One sees it as redirection. The other sees it as rejection. One remains steady. The other spirals. The delay didn't change. The interpretation did. And interpretation determines emotional response. Emotional response determines decisions. Decisions determine outcomes. Most believers think spiritual warfare means casting something out, rebuking something loudly, or fighting externally. But inside the occult, we understood something much simpler. If we could introduce a thought at the right moment, especially when someone was tired, offended, or afraid, and they accepted it without examination, momentum shifted automatically. We didn't need dramatic possession. We needed agreement. A thought like, God isn't helping you. This will never change. They're against you. You're behind. You're failing. Those thoughts aren't loud. They're subtle. They blend in with your own voice. And once accepted, they start influencing posture. Posture influences tone. Tone influences conflict. Conflict influences isolation. Isolation increases vulnerability. And suddenly, the person thinks they're under massive spiritual attack. But what really happened? They believed a thought without testing it. That's why so many believers feel like they're losing. They're fighting externally while internally agreeing with distortion. You don't win spiritual battles by reacting faster. You win by evaluating slower. When a thought arrives, pause. Ask, is this fear speaking or truth? Is this urgency real or emotional? Is this accusation specific or vague? Would I believe this at 9 a.m. or only at midnight? Inside the occult, the most frustrating people were not the loudest. They were the calmest. They examined thoughts. They delayed reactions. They refused to escalate quickly. They didn't swallow every emotional impulse. And without emotional impulse, our leverage disappeared. This is why many of you feel exhausted. You are fighting every suggestion like it's reality. You are treating every feeling like instruction. You are responding to every emotional spike as if it demands action. But not every thought deserves engagement, and not every feeling deserves obedience. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you the posture we feared most, the one response that shut down escalation and prevented momentum from building. It's not dramatic, it's disciplined, and it changes everything. There was one posture that consistently disrupted everything we tried to build. Not shouting, not chasing demons, not dramatic declarations. Restraint. When someone refused to react immediately, momentum stalled. Inside the occult, escalation was the goal. If we could get someone emotionally activated, angry, afraid, offended, desperate, we could predict their next move. And predictable people are easy to influence. But restraint broke prediction. I remember watching situations where pressure was applied deliberately. Delays, misunderstandings, subtle provocation. The expectation was always the same: emotional response first, clarity later. But sometimes nothing happened. The person didn't respond to the message right away. They didn't confront immediately. They didn't explain themselves. They didn't spiral internally. They paused. And that pause was devastating to momentum, because restraint interrupts escalation. Most people think spiritual strength means quick reaction, quick rebuke, quick correction, quick defense. But the strongest people we encountered did the opposite. They slowed down. They let emotions settle before speaking. They refused to make decisions while activated. They understood something critical. Emotional activation is not discernment. When you respond while emotionally charged, you are no longer choosing, you are reacting. And reaction always favors manipulation. Restraint buys you space. Space to evaluate the thought, space to regulate the body, space to hear truth instead of noise. This is why scripture constantly emphasizes self-control, sobriety of mind, patience. Those aren't passive traits. They are defensive structures. I watched believers lose ground not because they were weak, but because they were too quick to defend, too quick to explain, too quick to assume motives, too quick to speak. And once words were spoken in emotion, consequences followed. But when restraint entered the picture, something shifted. Pressure didn't vanish, but it couldn't grow. Without reaction, the pressure had nowhere to go. Restraint is not avoidance. It is authority under control. It says, I decide when and how I engage. It says, this moment does not command me. It says, I will not hand over influence through impulse. Inside the occult, we feared restraint because it made outcomes unpredictable. And unpredictability weakens strategy. If you want to stop losing spiritual battles, stop treating every moment like an emergency. Not every thought is urgent. Not every feeling is a command. Not every situation requires immediate response. The ability to pause, to breathe, to delay, to remain steady is not weakness. It is one of the highest forms of strength. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you how to practice this posture practically, what to do in the moment when pressure rises, so restraint becomes natural instead of forced. Because knowing the posture is one thing, living it consistently is where victory actually happens. Knowing that restraint matters is one thing. Practicing it when your heart is racing is another. Because let's be honest, spiritual pressure rarely announces itself politely. It shows up in the middle of a disagreement, in a disappointing email, in unexpected silence, in financial strain, in a late night thought that feels louder than it should. And in that moment, your body reacts before your theology does. So here's what we feared most, not theory, not slogans, but a simple sequence. First, slow the body down. Inside the occult, we relied heavily on physiological escalation. If your breathing shortens, your thoughts speed up. If your heart rate increases, urgency feels real. And when urgency feels real, you act quickly. But when someone deliberately slowed their breathing, paused their speech, and physically grounded themselves, escalation stalled. It sounds simple, because it is. Take one full breath before responding, then take another. If possible, step away for 5 minutes. You would be shocked how many spiritual attacks dissolve when the nervous system regulates. Second, delay decisions. One of the most predictable weaknesses we saw was impatience. If someone felt misunderstood, they wanted resolution immediately. If they felt rejected, they wanted clarity immediately. If they felt threatened, they wanted defense immediately. But delay exposes distortion. Tell yourself, I will revisit this tomorrow, or I will respond after I've slept. Fatigue magnifies threat. Mourning reduces exaggeration. Third, interrogate the thought. Don't argue emotionally, evaluate logically. Is this thought specific or vague? Is it rooted in fact or assumption? Would I believe this if I weren't tired? Does this align with truth, or does it amplify fear? Inside the occult, vague accusations were powerful. You're failing. They don't respect you. This will collapse. But when someone demanded specifics, evidence, clarity, those suggestions weakened. Because distortion hates examination. Fourth, refuse to escalate tone. Tone is a battlefield. You can say the same sentence in peace or in agitation, and the outcome changes completely. When someone refused to raise their voice, refused sarcasm, refused defensiveness, conflict often lost momentum on its own. Calm disarms escalation, and escalation is where most ground is lost. Let me tell you something that may surprise you. Most spiritual battles are lost in conversations, not in prayer closets. They are lost in text messages sent too quickly, in statements spoken while hurt, in decisions made while angry. The enemy does not need to overpower you. He needs you activated. But when you slow down the body, delay the decision, interrogate the thought, and soften the tone, you become difficult to move. And difficult to move means difficult to manipulate. This is not passivity. It is controlled engagement. In the final chapter, I'm going to reveal the mindset shift that makes all of this sustainable, the identity adjustment that keeps you from feeling like you're constantly under attack in the first place. Because once identity stabilizes, battles decrease dramatically, and that's where real victory begins.